the airline owner's wife. The flight attendants clipped, icy tones sliced through the otherwise peaceful cabin. Amelia felt the collective gaze of her fellow passengers bore into her, scrutinizing her swollen belly and flushed cheeks. All she had asked for was a second pillow to alleviate the throbbing ache in her lower back. But the blonde woman's dismissive sneer conveyed an unspoken accusation, a silent judgment that felt far more cutting than a simple denial. Humiliation, hot and sharp, burned in Amelia's chest. She reached for her phone, fingers trembling with a strange cocktail of emotions, simmering anger and an unnerving sense of calm purpose. "They won't even give me a pillow," she texted her husband, Ethan. "The attendant just totally embarrassed me in front of everyone." The response flashed back almost instantly. "Who?" As passengers around her self-consciously avoided eye contact, feigning absorption in their books or the in-flight entertainment, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling of being unfairly judged. They were quick to assume, to categorize, to decide whether she belonged in this privileged space. What the flight attendant didn't know, what no one else on the plane suspected, was exactly who Amelia had chosen to marry. Today, here at Real Life Stories, we've documented countless instances where the balance of power shifts unexpectedly. But watching the blood drain from Ms. Hawthorne's face when she realized her passenger's husband owned the entire airline, that might just top the list as the most satisfying reversal of fortune we've ever covered. The first-class cabin hummed with its usual low thrum, a stark contrast to the storm brewing silently within Amelia. 7 months pregnant and already drained from a long, arduous day of travel, she shifted uncomfortably against the single, woefully inadequate pillow propping up her aching back. Each gentle kick from her unborn child was a tiny reminder of why this trip was so important. Ethan was waiting, and nothing, not even an officious flight attendant, was going to keep her from him. Ms. Hawthorne stood ramrod straight, a picture of rigid professionalism. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair was pulled back so tightly that it seemed to accentuate the severity of her features. Her blue eyes, hard and glinting, had swept over Amelia with unmistakable disapproval even before she'd uttered a single word. "First-class amenities are limited, ma'am," Hawthorne announced, her voice deliberately amplified so that nearby passengers could overhear. "We can't just hand out extra pillows simply because someone asks." The way she emphasized the word "someone" hung in the air, dripping with implication. It was as if Amelia were an interloper, an unwelcome guest trespassing in a space reserved for those deemed worthy. Several passengers glanced up briefly, their curiosity piqued, before quickly retreating behind the shields of their magazines and personal devices. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't need it," Amelia replied, struggling to maintain her composure as a wave of mortification washed over her. When Lena, a younger flight attendant with soft, dark curls and empathetic eyes, attempted to intervene, Hawthorne shut her down with a sharp, dismissive glare. "I think I know my job, Lena," she snapped. "We have to maintain fairness." What struck Amelia most acutely wasn't Hawthorne's blatant rudeness. She'd encountered her fair share of that over the years. It was the deafening silence emanating from everyone around her. Not a single passenger spoke up, offered a word of support, or challenged Hawthorne's behavior. Their collective silence felt like tacit validation, a silent endorsement of the flight attendant's condescending treatment. Amelia's fingers danced across her phone screen. Ethan's response was instantaneous. "What's the flight number?" Something in those four simple words resonated with Amelia, filling her with a sense of quiet assurance. She knew her husband. She knew his quiet authority, his methodical approach to solving problems. Ethan Williams didn't need to shout or make a scene. He simply acted. At the front of the cabin, Hawthorne poured herself a cup of coffee, muttering under her breath, "Some people just think they're more important than they are." Lena frowned, her brow furrowed with concern. "She's in first class," she pointed out. "She is important." "That doesn't mean anything," Hawthorne scoffed. "First class or not, we follow policies." What Hawthorne failed to grasp was that some policies existed precisely to accommodate passengers like Amelia, pregnant women in need of basic comfort and consideration during air travel. Instead, she had chosen to create a humiliating spectacle based on her own biased assumptions and prejudices. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Then, a crackling announcement shattered the uneasy quiet of the cabin. A text that changed everything. "Ms. Hawthorne, please report to the cockpit immediately." The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Every passenger sensed the palpable shift in atmosphere. Hawthorne, her usual confident stride betraying no hint of apprehension, made her way towards the front of the plane, oblivious to the storm-gathering force ahead. Inside the cockpit, Captain Reeves sat stone-faced beside a video call in progress. On the screen was Elias Grant, the airline's senior operations manager. His expression was grim. Hawthorne's practiced smile faltered slightly when she saw Grant's face. "The issue, Ms. Hawthorne, Grant said, his voice cold and devoid of warmth, is that we've received a direct complaint from executive headquarters regarding the mistreatment of a first-class passenger on this flight. Hawthorne straightened her uniform, her movements precise and controlled. There must be some misunderstanding. I was simply enforcing company policies. Did you check her ticket before deciding she didn't qualify for an extra pillow? Grant's voice sharpened, a clear indication that he wasn't buying her carefully constructed facade. I checked it, yes, Hawthorne replied, though the subtle hesitation in her voice betrayed the lie. But I was ensuring fairness among all passengers. Grant paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. The woman you refused a pillow to is Amelia Williams. He continued, his voice gaining intensity. Do you have any idea who her husband is? Silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Her husband is Ethan Williams, the owner of this airline. The color drained from Hawthorne's face, leaving her skin ashen. Everything inside her seemed to collapse inward. The owner's wife? The pregnant woman she had just humiliated was married to the man who signed her paychecks, the man who held the keys to her career? When this flight lands, Grant concluded, his words like shards of ice, you will be required to explain yourself directly to corporate. Hawthorne felt unsteady on her feet as she made her way back to the first-class cabin. Every eye followed her, the balance of power having shifted dramatically. She crouched beside Amelia's seat, forcing a sickly sweet pleasantness into her voice. Mrs. Williams, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. I'd like to personally offer you another pillow. Amelia's steady gaze bored through Hawthorne's carefully constructed facade. You're saying it was a misunderstanding? Yes, Hawthorne managed, her voice smaller and less assured than before. You didn't ask anyone else if they deserved to be here, Amelia replied, her voice calm but devastatingly effective. You didn't question whether the man across from me was in his correct seat. You just assumed I didn't belong. Hawthorne's mind raced, searching for a plausible explanation, a way to salvage the situation. Do you know who her husband is? Hawthorne's phone conversation with Ethan Williams minutes later only deepened her predicament. You're going to tell me, Ethan said, his voice dangerously measured and laced with icy restraint, why my pregnant wife was made to feel like she didn't belong in first class. I wasn't singling her out, Hawthorne protested weakly, her voice barely a whisper. I was following company policy. Did you check the first-class seating manifest before questioning my wife's presence? Ethan asked, his tone relentless. No, Hawthorne admitted, feeling smaller and more insignificant with each passing second. You didn't ask the businessman sitting across from her for his ticket. You didn't ask the older woman in 2C if she belonged. What made you decide that my wife, my pregnant wife, didn't deserve the same treatment? The answer hung unspoken between them, impossible to deny. Hawthorne had seen Amelia and made a snap judgment based solely on her appearance, on her own ingrained biases and prejudices. When this flight lands, Ethan continued, his voice leaving no room for argument. You're going to be escorted off the aircraft for a full review. And trust me, MS. Hawthorne, you're not going to like the outcome. For the remainder of the flight, Hawthorne avoided the first-class cabin entirely. The familiar authority she'd wielded for years had evaporated, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Every passenger who had witnessed her earlier behavior now watched her with a mixture of curiosity, disdain, and a palpable sense of satisfaction. As the plane began its descent, Amelia received another text from Ethan. Security is waiting at the gate. Stay seated when the doors open. The touchdown felt symbolic, a dramatic punctuation mark signifying the moment Hawthorne's career would crash and burn. When the doors opened and passengers normally would have rushed to gather their belongings, an unusual stillness persisted. Everyone was waiting. Then, a uniformed security officer stepped aboard. MS. Hawthorne, he called out, his voice resonating through the cabin. Every head turned as Hawthorne emerged from the galley, her face ashen and drawn. This wasn't a private matter anymore. It was a public spectacle, a highly visible demonstration of the consequences of her actions. You need to come with us, the officer stated, his tone polite but firm. Executive management has requested to speak with you directly. Hawthorne's walk down the aisle became a public acknowledgement of her downfall. She had humiliated Amelia at the beginning of this flight, and now she was experiencing a similar humiliation, but on a far grander scale. Her own prejudice was now on full display for everyone to witness. After Hawthorne's ignominious exit, Mr. Calloway, the businessman who had remained silent throughout the entire ordeal, leaned towards Amelia. That was quite something, he said, his voice laced with discomfort. Amelia turned to him, her expression unreadable. What was what? What happened with the flight attendant? I mean, when she was escorted off the plane, he clarified, avoiding direct eye contact. You all sat here and watched her talk down to me. Amelia continued, her voice calm but carrying a sharp edge. and no one said a word. But now that you know who I am, suddenly you care. A woman several rows ahead turned slightly. I should have said something, she murmured, her voice filled with regret. Yes, Amelia replied simply. She wasn't looking for validation or empty apologies from strangers. What mattered was that something had shifted within them. Perhaps, next time, someone would actually speak up, would stand up for what was right. The jet bridge door reopened, and Ethan stepped aboard. Tall, commanding, and impeccably dressed in a sharp black suit, he moved with the quiet confidence of a man who owned the space he occupied, because he did. Passengers who had previously ignored Amelia now sat straighter, suddenly acutely aware of whose presence they'd been sharing the cabin with. Ethan's focus remained solely on his wife. He reached out his hand, his gaze softening as he met her eyes. Come on, sweetheart. Let's get you home. Outside, two airline executives waited, their faces grim and impassive. Hawthorne stood pale-faced and trembling, awaiting her fate. She was no longer in control, no longer the authority figure. She was just an employee, under review, her career hanging precariously in the balance. In their car, Amelia finally relaxed against the soft leather seat, the tension slowly easing from her shoulders. So what happens to her? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She's suspended until the board reviews the incident. Ethan replied, his jaw tight with suppressed anger. But let's be honest, she won't be coming back. Amelia nodded, but her thoughts weren't just about Hawthorne. She was thinking about all the people who had been in her position, all the people who had been subjected to similar mistreatment, but without a supportive partner, without an Ethan Williams to set things right. As if reading her thoughts, Ethan pulled out his phone. Yes, this is Ethan. I want a new policy implemented immediately. A policy change that will last. Mandatory bias training for all first-class crew members, increased oversight on passenger treatment, and a new complaint system, one that doesn't require someone to be married to the CEO to actually get hurt. Ethan Williams didn't just handle problems. He changed systems to prevent them from recurring. He addressed the root cause. You really don't like loose ends, do you? Amelia smiled, wrapping her arm around his. Not when they mess with my wife, he replied with a smirk, his eyes crinkling at the corners. As their car pulled away from the terminal, Amelia felt the tension she'd carried since takeoff finally dissipate. Hawthorne was gone, the flight was over, and somewhere in corporate headquarters, a new policy was being drafted, one that would hopefully ensure that the next Amelia Williams wouldn't need a powerful husband to be treated with basic respect and dignity. That evening, as Amelia enjoyed her favorite seafood takeout in the comfort of their home, her phone buzzed with a forwarded email. The subject line read, Termination Notice, Mara Hawthorne. Guess it's official, she mused, showing Ethan the screen. He barely glanced at it. It was official the moment she got escorted off that plane. Ethan reached for her hand, his expression shifting to something more serious, more intense. If this ever happens again, if anyone ever tries to make you feel small like that, I don't care if it's a flight attendant, a board member, or the president of the United States. No one gets to treat you like that. With Ethan, these weren't just empty words. They were a promise, a solemn vow that he would always protect her, stand by her, and fight for her when needed. I know, Amelia replied softly, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. Because she did. She knew, without a doubt, that he meant every word. That night, as she sank into their comfortable couch, the stress of the flight, of Hawthorne, of the entire exhausting situation, finally melted away. All that mattered now was home, safety, and the knowledge that justice had been served. Weeks later, Amelia received an unexpected email. The subject line read, Thank you, from Flight 378. It was from Lena, the young flight attendant who had tried to help her that day. After what happened, the airline completely transformed its training program, Lena wrote. Every staff member now learns to recognize when policies hurt rather than help. Your stand that day changed everything, not just for MS. Hawthorne, but for all of us. Amelia smiled, resting her hand on her now larger belly. The incident had taught her something profound. Power wasn't just about who you knew or what position you held. It was about refusing to accept mistreatment silently, about holding people accountable when they failed to see the humanity in others. Sometimes, the most important changes begin with a simple request for a pillow. Your stand that day changed everything. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly and wish things had gone differently? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories of justice, empowerment, and unexpected twist of fate.